The moment I heard Gerald's voice on the other end of the line say, "Don't come tonight," I knew something was wrong. Not wrong like he forgot to pick up dry cleaning. Wrong like the floor had just disappeared beneath my feet. Let me back up. My name is Vivienne. I'm 34 years old. I'm a structural engineer at Aldercroft Design Group in Chicago, which sounds impressive until you understand that I spent 6 years pouring my soul into a firm where I was the only woman in senior management. And my husband, was the reason I got through every brutal deadline, every condescending remark from older colleagues, every moment I doubted myself. Or so I thought. His name is Patrick Hale. He's the CEO of Hale Meridian Properties, which develops mixed-use commercial real estate across the Midwest. He is charming in the way that expensive watches are charming. Beautiful on the surface, complicated underneath, and ultimately something that keeps time for itself. We met 8 years ago at an industry mixer in downtown Chicago. I was 26. He was 31. He bought me a drink I didn't ask for and somehow made it not feel presumptuous. We were married 4 years later in a vineyard in the Hudson Valley. His mother, Rosemary, gave a toast that made me cry. I thought she meant every word. The project that mattered, the one that changed everything, was called the Meridian Lakeview Center, a 32-story mixed-use development on the north side of Chicago, Patrick's most ambitious project to date. And the structural design? That was mine. 14 months of my life. I worked nights. I worked weekends. I turned down a consulting contract in Denver that would have paid me twice my salary because Patrick said he needed me, and I believed him. I need to tell you something, though. There was a woman named Celeste Drummond. She and Patrick had dated for 3 years before we met. She was his college girlfriend, the one his mother used to talk about at holidays with a little too much warmth, the one who showed up in old photographs. Patrick kept in a shoebox in the back of his closet that he didn't know I'd found. She was an architect. She had been working at a firm in Seattle for years, and 6 months before the Meridian Lakeview launch event, Patrick hired her firm as a design consultant on the project. He told me it was just business. He said it like I was supposed to accept it, like the weather. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that, but I told myself I was being insecure. I kept working. I finished the structural plans. I filed the drawings with the city under my name and Aldercroft's name, with timestamps and permit records and everything that legally tied the work to me. That should matter. I want you to remember that. The launch event was held at the Lakeshore Ballroom, a venue Patrick rented for the occasion. Investors, city officials, journalists from the Tribune and the architectural press. Patrick had spent weeks on the presentation. I had spent weeks helping him. The night before, I was up until 2 a.m. reviewing the slide deck with him, adjusting load calculations in the data room, making sure every technical detail was accurate so that he wouldn't embarrass himself in front of the structural engineers in the room. He told me to wear something nice. He said it like a compliment. I wore a deep green dress. I remember that detail because of what happened next. I arrived at the ballroom 30 minutes before the event started. Patrick was already there, deep in conversation near the entrance with a group of investors. He glanced at me when I walked in and gave me a quick smile, the kind you give the coat check person, and went back to his conversation. I found my seat. My name was on a plaques card near the back of the room, not at the head table where I had assumed I would sit. I told myself the seating chart was probably just logistics. Then the presentation started. Patrick walked up to the podium, looking like the cover of a business magazine, and he began telling the story of the Meridian Lakeview Center. He talked about vision. He talked about legacy. He talked about how this project represented everything his company stood for. And then he said, none of this would have been possible without the brilliant design work of Celeste Drummond and her team at Drummond Architecture. The room applauded. I sat very still. He went on for another 40 minutes. He named vendors. He named contractors. He named the coffee brand that kept the project team going through late nights. He did not say my name once. I waited. I kept waiting, the way you wait for something to fix itself, the way you keep expecting the movie to make sense if you just watch long enough. But the presentation ended. Patrick thanked the room. Investors shook his hand. Celeste stood near the front, wearing a white blazer, and smiling the way you smile when you've won something. I walked up to Patrick as the room broke into cocktail conversation. I waited until there was a pause in the crowd around him, and I touched his elbow, gently, because I was still, even then, trying not to make a scene. You didn't mention my work, I said. He looked at me the way adults look at children who have asked an inappropriate question in public. Vivienne, tonight isn't about credits. It's about the project. I designed the structural system, I said. 14 months. That's my work up on those slides. Celeste's team did the architectural vision, he said, and his voice dropped lower in a way that was clearly meant to signal that I should also lower mine. The structure is technical support. It's not the same thing. I looked at him. I looked at him for a long moment, and I understood something I should have understood much earlier. I was not a partner in his life. I was not even a colleague he respected. I was a resource he had used up and shelved. This is the last time you'll use my work without my name on it, I said very quietly. He laughed. Not cruelly, almost patiently, like I was being dramatic. Let's talk about this at home. I did not go home that night. I called my sister Dottie. She lives in Wicker Park, 12 minutes from the venue by cab, and she picked up on the second ring like she always does. I sat in her kitchen until 3 in the morning, drinking chamomile tea and not crying, which felt important somehow. The not crying. Dottie didn't push me to talk. She just sat across from me and let me be whatever I was. In the morning, I called our attorney. Her name is Beverly Marsh, and she has handled our estate planning since year 2 of our marriage. I told her I needed to talk about something different this time. Beverly listened without interruption. When I was done, she said, "Do you have the original file drawings?" I did. I had everything. The AutoCAD files with timestamps, the permit applications with my name as engineer of record, the email chains where Patrick had forwarded my calculations to his contractor and never once mentioned they came from his wife, the months of documentation that I had accumulated without ever intending to use as evidence, because I had trusted him. Beverly said, "You have a case. Here is what I want to say about the weeks that followed, because people always ask how you survived the time between the explosion and the aftermath. You survived by staying very busy with the right thingsies. I did not move out immediately. I went home the morning after the event, and I was civil. I was distant, but I was civil. Patrick seemed to think we had already resolved the argument. He brought home flowers on the 3rd day, which struck me as such a spectacular misreading of the situation that I almost laughed out loud. I did not show him what I was doing. I filed a formal complaint with the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations asserting that my engineering work had been presented publicly without proper attribution. Beverly sent a letter to Hale Meridian Properties requesting full documentation of all design credits associated with the Meridian Lakeview project. The letter was addressed to Patrick's corporate counsel, not to Patrick himself. He found out on a Tuesday morning. I know because he called me while I was at my desk at Aldercroft, and his voice had a quality I had never heard before, a tightness, like something in him was being compressed. "What is this letter?" he said. It wasn't a question. "It's a legal request," I said. "You're suing me." "Beverly is requesting documentation," I said. "What happens next depends on what that documentation shows." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. "Vivienne, this is our life. You realize that?" "I realize that you presented my work as someone else's in front of 200 people and then told me it was technical support," I said. "I realize that." He hung up. That afternoon, his mother called me. I want to be careful about how I talk about Rosemary, because she is complicated in a way that took me years to fully understand. She is a woman who spent 40 years making herself smaller so that the men around her could seem larger. And she raised a son who learned to expect that same accommodation from the women in his life. She is not a villain, but she is not innocent either. She called and asked if we could have lunch. I agreed. We met at a French bistro in Lincoln Park that Rosemary likes because they know her name there. She ordered the salmon. She looked at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as carefully arranged sympathy. And she said, "Patrick is struggling, Vivienne. He feels blindsided." "He feels blindsided," I said. "He didn't handle the event well. He knows that. He said to tell you he's sorry. He should tell me himself." Rosemary set down her fork. "I want to ask you not to do this, not the legal thing. Whatever Beverly is doing, I want you to ask her to stop. For the sake of your marriage." I looked at her. I thought about the toast she gave at our wedding. I thought about how much I had wanted her to mean it. "Rosemary," I said, "do you know what I built?" She looked uncomfortable. "Patrick explained that your firm contributed to 14 months, I said. "I can show you the timestamps. I can show you the permit applications. My name is on every document filed with the city of Chicago. The work that was presented at that event as Celeste Drummond's architectural vision is structurally impossible without what I built. The building cannot stand without my work. And Patrick stood at a podium in front of 200 people and did not say my name. Rosemary was quiet for a moment. She picked up her water glass and set it down without drinking from it. "He's under a lot of pressure," she finally said. I nodded slowly. "I know." I paid for my own lunch and I left. 2 days later, something happened that I did not expect. Rosemary called me again. It was late, nearly 9 at night. I almost didn't pick up. "I looked at the permit records," she said. Her voice was different, quieter. "I know someone at the city planning office. I asked him to pull the Meridian Lakeview documentation." I waited. "Your name is on everything," she said. "Yes," I said. "It is." Another silence. Then Rosemary said, "I owe you an apology. I came to that lunch to protect my son. I've been protecting him his whole life." She stopped. I could hear that she was choosing her next words carefully. "I didn't know how much he had taken from you. I should have asked before I assumed." I didn't know what to say. I had braced myself for every version of this except honesty. "I'm not asking you to drop the case," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong." Patrick did not apologize. He hired his own attorney. He argued that my contributions fell under a professional services arrangement between Aldercroft Design Group and Hale Meridian, and that per standard industry contracts, design credits were at the discretion of the developer. It was a reasonable-sounding argument until Beverly pointed out that I had not been engaged as a vendor. I had been working as a spouse contributing professional expertise to a family enterprise. And there was no signed contract, no fee agreement, nothing. Because Patrick had asked me to help, not hired me, the project stalled. The city put a hold on the certificate of occupancy pending resolution of the attribution dispute, because the engineer of record, me, had formally raised a concern about documentation integrity. 2 of the investors made inquiries. The Tribune ran a short item about a dispute over design credits at a prominent Chicago development firm. Patrick's name was in the second paragraph. It was around this time that I began to see how much of my own story I had been telling in his voice. How many times I had described my own work by starting with him, his project, his building, his presentation. How many times I had looked at something I made and thought of it as an accessory to his ambition rather than an achievement of my own. I left our home on a Saturday. I didn't take much. I took my files, my drafting materials, and a framed photo of Dottie and me at her college graduation that had been sitting on the shelf in our home office for 3 years. I took the work. I left the furniture. I had been in conversation for several weeks, quietly, carefully, with Torrance Structural Consultants, a firm I had admired for years that had been trying to recruit me since before I married Patrick. I had always said no because Patrick's projects kept me too busy. I said yes now. I signed the contract on the same afternoon I moved out of our house. There's something I haven't told you yet. Before the legal dispute resolved, before I left, I found out something by accident. I was going through old emails looking for project documentation, and I found a forwarded message chain that Patrick had accidentally included in a file he shared with me. A chain between him and Celeste that went back to 8 months before the launch event. In it, she had asked him how he planned to handle the attribution question at the launch. He had written back, "She'll understand. She always does. She always does." I read that sentence more times than I needed to. I knew what it meant. It meant that he had decided, months in advance, deliberately, to erase my name. Not out of oversight. Not out of poor judgment in the moment. He had planned it. He had discussed it with her. And he had counted on the fact that I would absorb the humiliation the way I had absorbed everything else. Because I always did. I forwarded that email to Beverly. The case settled 4 months later. I won't tell you the full terms because some of it is confidential, but I will tell you this. My name is now listed in the official project documentation for the Meridian Lakeview Center as structural engineer of record. It's on the project website. It's on the permits. It is in the building. Every person who walks into that building is, in some small way, standing on something I made. Patrick and I are divorced. The proceedings were not pleasant, but they were efficient. He married Celeste 11 months later. I read about it in an industry newsletter someone forwarded to me. I don't think they meant it unkindly, they just didn't know. I sat with it for about 5 minutes and then I went back to what I was working on. What I was working on was a pedestrian bridge commission in Milwaukee. A small project by some measures, but it was mine, entirely openly, completely mine. My name on the bid, my name on the contract, my name on the dedication plaque when it opens next spring. Dottie is already planning to drive up for the ribbon cutting. Rosemary sends me a card every Christmas. I send one back. We do not pretend the past didn't happen, but we don't live there either. She told me once, in one of those cards, that she had started seeing a therapist. Not because of any of this, she said, but she admitted that any of this had made her realize she had some things to work through. I respected her for writing that down and sending it. People ask me what I would tell someone in my position. In that ballroom, in that green dress, listening to her own work, being credited to someone else while she sat in the back of the room near the exits. I never quite know how to answer that because the truth is complicated. I would tell her, you already know. You already know when you're being made smaller, when the person across from you is calculating what they can take from you, rather than building something with you. The knowledge sits in your chest like a splinter. You can feel it even when you pretend you can't. What I wish someone had told me earlier is that leaving something that belongs to you is not the same as losing it. My work is in that building regardless of what Patrick put on the slide deck that night. The structure is there. The calculations are there. The 14 months are there. He couldn't erase that with a presentation no matter what he tried. He could only erase his name from my future. And honestly, that part took care of itself. I walked across the Meridian Lakeview lobby last fall, the first time I had been inside since the building opened. I was meeting a contractor for lunch at the restaurant on the ground floor. I stopped in the middle of the atrium and looked up at the interior span, the load distribution I had calculated in my kitchen at midnight while Patrick slept. I stood there for a long moment. Nobody knew who I was. The lobby was full of people going to lunch, going to meetings, going about their ordinary days. And the building held them all up, quietly and completely, the way good structure always does. Not asking to be noticed, just doing what it was built to do. I thought, that's enough. That's more than enough. I went to lunch. I ordered the soup. Outside the window, Chicago looked exactly like itself. Big and cold and indifferent, and full of things being built by people whose names you'll never know. I am one of them, and I have never been more at peace with anything in my life.